Okay, so inequality is again there being differences in the amount of income received or the amount of wealth held by different households or different people in the society. But it is a little bit difficult concept to define and to measure. Has some difficulties around it. Okay, so let's look at those. So one is maybe temporary with lots of mobility. So if it's temporary with lots of mobility, it's probably not as big a concern. So temporary mean like while people are students, they have low incomes, but after they graduate, their incomes are much higher, or that young people don't have much wealth, but they tend to accumulate wealth as they get older, and by the time, so that the wealth is unequally distributed. But when you look at the age structure, it's that the older people tend to have their wealth because they've sort of built up over time, and younger people don't. But then when those younger people grow up, they're going to have wealth too. So if it's like that, it's maybe not as big a concern if it's over the life cycle. But you still would want to consider that, right? So you probably will want to do some taxing so that you can pay for example, education programs that will benefit families with young children, because families with young children may not have the income or the wealth yet to invest, even though they will later on in their life cycle. So this gives you some example of that. Okay. The second thing, do we care about income inequality or do we care about wealth inequality? Because those are two different things, though they are related. So is there unequal inequality in income? Is that what's important to you, or do you care about wealth inequality? Most data is about income inequality, partly because wealth is much harder to measure. It's much harder to get good data on it. In fact, often it's almost impossible to get really good data on wealth. In addition to wealth and related to wealth, in many countries, they also look at things like land inequality in land ownership, at least in rural societies where land ownership is a very important productive asset. And then the last one, do we care about inequality in actual income versus inequality in ability to earn income? So for example, this could be human capital, or it could be land, right? Or other physical capital. So do we care about people's actual income, or do we care about their ability to earn income? So like, for example, when somebody is so you say you graduate from college and you have a good major, and then you go join the Peace Corps for a couple of years. So during that time, you're making very little money, right? So in our income statistics, it's going to look as if you are disadvantaged, but in reality, you're a college graduate. You could earn money. You just chose not to at that time. So in that case, it's probably not the kind of inequality we're really concerned about, right? So we probably would really care mostly about people's ability to earn money, not whether or not they are earning money or not. Okay, so that is another concern. Now, in reality, these things are all important ideas, and if you want to understand this issue with depth, there are things you should understand. But in reality, we generally don't have the data we need for all of these. So generally, we just measure income inequality based on the current income. And we do know that this might be hiding lots of other issues underneath it. And so that's sort of the point of pointing these out, is we know that there might be hiding a lot of other things underneath this. Now, take a second, and before we move on, take a second to think about I'm going to look at wealth. So for the most part in this class, we're going to look at income in this section, but briefly we want to look at wealth. So take a second to think, how distributed is wealth in the United States? Okay, so take a second to think about it and kind of think. So we're gonna be dividing into quintiles. So quintiles is each group has 20% of the population, and kind of think, well, how much does each quintile have? The top 20%, the next 20, the next 20 after that, and so on. How much of the total wealth of the U.S. is held by each group? So kind of get a picture of a graph in your head, and then I'm going to go to the next slide. So you might want to pause for just a second. Okay, so we're going to go ahead. All right, so this actually shows, well, this is, Americans generally have a totally inaccurate picture of things to do with statistics and the economy, and also things to do with statistics and crime. Those are two, for some reason, people have totally inaccurate ideas about both of these. Even people who study economics, students often still tend to have totally inaccurate ideas. So let's look at what's going on. So the first thing, this is what most Americans would like it to be. So they think it's fair that the top 20% would have a little more wealth and the next one a little bit more, and there'd be this big middle, and then even the poorest 20% would own some wealth. They think they would like it to be. Well, so when they're surveyed and you ask them to kind of choose their ideal distribution of wealth, that's what they would pick. In fact, maybe in the future I will have students do this as an activity before we do this unit. Okay? Most Americans, when you poll them, they think it's like this. So they think the top 20% has a little more than half of the wealth. And then the next groups, the next 20 has, maybe they own a little over 10% of the wealth, and the third 20 owns some, and then the bottom 40% own, a little bit, but not very much, less than 10% total between them. Okay, that's what they think is the case. So they think things are a little more unequal than they would like them to be. But in actuality, things are way more unequal than that. So the top 20% owns more than 80% of the wealth. So they own more than 80% of the wealth. And the next group owns a little bit less than they thought they did. But the real big one is the bottom 40% owns almost no wealth. Like they control almost no wealth. And even the third 20% controls very little. So what's going on here? Well, one of the things is, and the other thing that's also very weird, if you ask people, everyone always thinks they're in the middle. And often when you start asking people questions, you find out they're not in the middle, right? So actually, I'm not going to ask you to do anything about this in class, but it's always good to kind of think about where your family probably is. And often people find out they're actually not where they think they are when they really honestly evaluate these things. So top 20%, well, one of the things is ownership of financial securities. So yes, people have some financial securities, but not that high a percentage of people have large portfolios. So that's one of them. Also business owners, okay, people who own businesses, that's also wealth. And homeowners, but homeowners who have significant equity in their homes. Those are kind of the things. So when you think about the rates of home ownership in the U.S., and then you think about how many of those people bought their house long enough ago that they've either paid down their mortgage a lot, or that their house has appreciated a lot, so that they have significant, and they haven't cashed it out, so that they have significant equity in it. And that's mostly going to be older people who are fairly financially stable. Yeah. So the wealth is extremely unequally distributed in the U.S. Americans, they say they would like it to be much more equally distributed, but in general, they're very resistant to any kind of policies that would change this. This part was just sort of an aside, just kind of motivate the topic. We're focusing on developing countries, so this is not such a big deal. I just kind of wanted to make it personal to you.